Good afternoon, everyone. I know that there are some people that are still slowly coming in, but we have so much to get to today. I want to make sure that you have the most time with speakers and not necessarily take up too much time with logistics. I'd like to welcome you today to the 23rd Annual Child Welfare Conference sponsored by the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. My name is Dr. Tracy Laliberty, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center, which you may also hear people refer to as CASCW throughout the day. I'd like to acknowledge that our university and the land on which we are located is the unceded, traditional, ancestral, and contemporary land of Dakota people, who are the first people of Minnesota Makoche. By offering the land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and work to hold the university, ourselves, our learners, our partners, accountable to American Indian peoples and nations. We also acknowledge slavery's deep roots and recognize the significant role that captive and free African Americans have played in building our country. This is the second part of our conference. Yesterday was the first part. Wildly well attended. We were so pleased to have so many people from different disciplines, different states, 33 states, I think, and several countries attend. So we're really looking forward to continuing that conversation again today. Let's take a moment and just see who is all here today. I see we've got about 350 folks who are logged on. Crystal, do you want to put up the poll? In a moment, you're going to see a poll go onto your screen. If you could quickly answer that, it will let us know everybody who's here and the different disciplines that are represented. Just to give people a sense of who's interested in participating in these really critical conversations around supporting the collaboration between birth and foster parent relationships. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm not controlling the poll, so I don't know when the answers. Oh, there's the answers. They're going to pop up. So as we would expect, as the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, the majority of our attendees are from child protection or foster care. But we have tribal caseworkers, private agency folks, supervisors and managers, guardian ad litems, birth families, resource families, and then a host of people who click other. So thank you for doing that. I think it just kind of gives everybody a little perspective as we're asking questions and answering questions, who's all in the room, so to speak. I'm going to take just a moment to thank the outreach staff of CASCW. It's, as you can imagine, a fairly Herculean task to get not only one virtual conference going, but to have two days back to back. They've worked very, very hard. And they've also worked on the development of our CW 360 publication. That is an electronic publication that will be sent to everybody registered, and hard copies are also available. That publication will support upwards of maybe 30, 40 articles related to supporting collaborative birth and foster parent relationships in the field of child welfare. Things that caseworkers can do, things that private practitioners can do to support these relationships. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be sent to you this summer. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy Gehring, who is the Director of Outreach for CASCW.
Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Stacy Gehringer, the Director of Outreach. Really excited for our conference lineup today. There are just quite a few logistics we'll just cover right away, and we'll remind folks in the chat. CEUs will be emailed out to attendees within a week of this conference. The conference will be recorded, and it will also be posted to our CASCW website. Presenter PowerPoint slides, if they've provided them, will be posted to our website. Because we have more than 750 registrants for today's conference, we are unable to host a virtual chat. However, we will be using the Q&A to answer questions for 2 of the 4 presentations today. We do encourage engagement in many other ways. So we will provide the contact information for each presenter. CASCW is open to emails from participants. And please engage via social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I'll put the hashtag in the chat. And then finally, in terms of the Q&A, we would like to funnel all of the questions through there. So they will be addressed at the end of each session. And we might have some limited time for questions, but we'll do our best to get to them. We will create a parking lot Google Doc for questions we aren't able to get to, and hope that the presenters will be able to answer some of those questions for folks. So I'm going to move on to introductions. And the agenda for today is on the screen. This conference will go to 4 o'clock Central Time. And so you can see here kind of what's in store. Our first presentation is a panel representing the Quality Parenting Initiative in Minnesota, also known as Qpi Minnesota, which we referred to several times yesterday if you attended the conference. This panel is entitled Relationships as a Resource, Improving Outcomes for Youth, Families, and Our Communities. Individuals, audience members will walk away from this panel with inspiration and strategies Qpi Minnesota is using to cultivate connection between caregivers, parents, youth, and professionals. Panelists include Shanna King and Carmela Hines. Darlene Bell, a foster parent in Minnesota, was unable to attend for the panel today. And the session will be moderated by Kate Rickard. Shanna is a racial equity leader with Qpi Minnesota and a parent mentor at the Indian Child Welfare Center in Minneapolis. She is an enrolled member of MHA Nation in North Dakota. Carmela Hines supports foster families, children, and young people as a licensing worker for Family Alternatives in Minnesota. Carmela is a former young person in foster care and transracial adoptee. Kate is a founding leader in the Qpi Minnesota efforts and works to elevate the voice of lived experience individuals for system change. So before we hear from the panel, we're going to hear first from Kirsten Anderson, who's the executive director of Aspire Minnesota. And she's just going to share a brief overview of the story of Qpi Minnesota as it relates to policy and legislation. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you to the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare and to all of you for your commitment to these conversations, for your commitment to enhancing practice to support kids and families across the state of Minnesota. And today, thank you for your interest in Quality Parenting Initiative Minnesota. I love this story, and so I'm so delighted to share this with you. And just to speak a minute about Aspire Minnesota. Aspire Minnesota is a statewide association of children's service providers, and in that role, we support the member organizations and child and family serving entities across the states in the areas of policy, research, outcome evaluation, and leadership development. So again, it's a great pleasure to be with you today and to share a bit about that Qpi Minnesota story. So I'm going to try to be brief, but I am quite enthusiastic. So if I go on, someone can nudge me. So Qpi was discovered by St. David Center originally out of the Youth Law Center in California. Those of you who were here yesterday heard a great deal about some of those stories from Executive Director Jennifer Rodriguez herself. And as they discovered Qpi, they were both inspired by the leaders, and then they came and brought that inspiration back to our community-based foster care organizations, asking the question, how could we bring Qpi to Minnesota? And in that dialogue, there was a lot of mutual, both inspiration and reluctance, because oftentimes Qpi, or exclusively, Qpi has been a mandated reform in other states and jurisdictions. And so the notion that we would simply voluntarily begin this movement, initiate this foster care reform, was a little bit outlandish. And so everyone needed to be a little bit loved into the equation. But as the story goes, when it was launched out of greater heft in the inspiration column than in the reluctance is going to work column, it brought together a whole vast constituency, likely many of you in this conversation today, who are inspired by how it is that we might be able to build this reform in the state of Minnesota. And in naming the values around honoring our birth families, around honoring our foster families, around honoring young people, and all of us engaged in these conversations, focusing on those primary knowledge holders and those with experience, that has really driven us forward. So out of those value propositions and sense of what we could do together, Qpi Minnesota was launched. And as we set that runway, that momentum has simply begun to build and continues to build as that practice demonstrates the real value of what this panel is all about today, the establishment of relationships for the care of children. And the great, inspiring, and so grounded proposition of quality parenting, that the best practice that we can give kids and families is indeed loving parenting. So those values established and launched us and continues to sustain that momentum. And quality parenting initiative quality parenting is primarily practice. As Katie Byron shared yesterday, we cannot wait for policy to make changes. So part of what I was asked to do today is speak to the policy implications. And so part of the wonderful part of QPI is that we're not waiting for policy, because all of you here know that policy sometimes takes so long and is definitely a lagging indicator of success in our movements and reforms. And so QPI is really about that practice element. And as part of our work within the wider QPI discussion, Representative Rena Moran, who is a champion for so many beautiful things for kids, families, and communities, she came into the equation and said, you know what, I am very invested in the values of QPI, and particularly the foundational step of that initial call, or that comfort call. And so out of her leadership, she brought together all that are needed to make policy change and establish comfort calls as part of our practice in the state of Minnesota, requiring that at the time of placement that a call be placed to the birth parent and establish a positive relationship based on the care of the child at that time for growth into the future. And as we have seen tremendous value in establishing the comfort call, we've also found in that teaching and learning the importance of technical assistance and training. Because as we heard from Erica Lewis's research yesterday, in our striving to prioritize connection over compliance, the power of personal narrative is a critical component for incentivizing participation and inspiring commitments. She particularly found in the power of training and technical assistance that QPI holds great promise for strengthening foster care, because it acknowledges perspectives of birth and foster parents and explicitly focuses on equitable participation in the process. So this is one of the findings that we have arrived at, that training and technical assistance are critical, and part of that is simply the handing on of those personal narratives, that we know that making these practice changes does make a huge difference, and that it makes a difference both for the child and family and for the system. And so there is upside for everyone, but it's a little bit challenging to believe in that until you experience it yourself, or you have that story handed to you in that loving way that we can offer with training and technical assistance. So as a result of all of that, we do have another minor policy event happening in the state of Minnesota as it relates to quality parenting initiative, in that there is an appropriation that's being supported by both House and Senate Human Service omnibus bills right now that would include some resources for QPI Minnesota to continue this growth trajectory with a focus on technical assistance and training. So we continue to be very hopeful about that. And with that, I will conclude my enthusiastic offering of the initial story about Quality Parenting Initiative and hand the mic to Director of Quality Parenting Initiative Minnesota, Kate Rickard.
Hi, thanks, Kirsten. We are very excited today to talk about QPI. For those of you who did not have the opportunity to listen to Executive Director Jennifer Rodriguez or Erica Lewis share her insight and research, I just will help ground us a little bit in what QPI is really about. The core principles are about relationships. If there is a service that we could provide for youth and families who are involved in the child protection and foster care system, it would be that of meaningful relationships and quality parenting. Another one is that our policy and practice is based on research. You know, if you think about what we know and continue to learn about child development, the role of attachment, security, you know, what happens with adversity, we want to be able to use that developmental research as a grounding foundation to why we make decisions. And then the third would be those who have been most impacted by a system are also the ones who can generate the best solutions for that system. And so that's really what QPI is all about in the various ways. I am super excited for Shauna and Carmela to join and for you to be able to hear from them. They are a few of my favorite people. And I am bummed for all of you that Darlene Bell wasn't able to join. She has a vibrancy that leaves you with like, I think I could do something about this, which we will do our best through Shauna, Carmela, and myself to give that to you. And so I have just one ask as we kind of ground ourselves before getting into some, tactical strategies and inspiration, is that yesterday, Chandra talked about an invite to be bold and brazen. And I would like to create an invite today for you to think about, how can I be curious and caring? What goes into what are the right ingredients for me to be able to show up in that way with curiosity and with care? And so without any more introduction, I would love to bring Shauna and Carmela on to the screen so that we can continue on. All right. Hello, friends. It's good to see you.
Hi.
So my first introduction to Shauna was back in 2019 when one of the foster families I was working with had attended the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership Strategic Convening. And they came back and they're like, you have got to meet this person. And so I kind of cold called and was like, Shauna, I'd love to meet you for coffee. I hope you're willing to. And she was, and they were so right for why I and QPI needed to connect with Shauna. So Shauna, if you would just do like a little intro about yourself and kind of what brought you to join these QPI efforts, and if there's anything that stands out to you as part of that.
Sure. Adosha, hello. Me, it's Madakabe Hoba Mia. My name is Holy Owl Woman, and my English given name is Shauna King. And you're right, I still am a part of the Birth Foster Parent Partnership, and attended the first meeting there. And I sit on the BPAC, which is the Birth Parent Advisory Committee for Casey Family Programs. And they kind of tied us into that meeting right afterwards. And, when we first thought about it, I remember my experience. I'm a birth mom who has been a kid in foster care, and then also had her kids in foster care successfully united. I thought about my experiences and I thought, this is not going to work. Foster parents don't care. They don't build relationships. I don't talk to any of the 4 different foster homes that I lived in 4 years, and didn't have a good relationship with the foster parents that my kids were in home with. But the more I attended the meetings and learned about it and met foster parents, you build those relationships. I believe Darlene was one of them. I'm sad she couldn't be here today. It amazed me about, like, if all foster families thought like that, what a difference that would have made in my life as a child and as an adult, and what a difference it would have made in my children's lives, and how I could possibly still have like family, because I'm an Indigenous person. And as you know, I come from generational and historical trauma. And a lot of that ties into relationships and family and keeping healthy relationships in my life. And unfortunately, it wasn't a healthy space for me to have my birth family in my life. So, being able to have built those relationships with foster homes would have been instrumental in my life, and probably would not have caused as much traumas that have happened in my future with as far as having my kids there. So I guess once I started going to those meetings, it all clicked. And then I saw you on screen, Kate, talking about how you guys were working here. And I'm like, how can I get this in ICWA? I work at the ICWA Law Center. How can we implement this into the space that I'm in? Because it makes sense. The families that I'm working with could really use this support in their lives. And they could also take that burden of, there's a whole nother person who's judging me and my kids off of my back. So it just made sense for me to advocate for it, and then to have it to be a part of the Indigenous community here in Minnesota.
Thank you. And then our other panelist today is Carmela. And I have to say the dedication that Carmela has been showing to our youth voice leaders is fierce and on fire. They've had presentations in March, both for a national webinar with the Youth Law Center, as well as the annual conference at the MSSA here in Minnesota. And it has been such a lovely journey to watch you. But I would love if you would just introduce yourself and kind of what, entering the QPI Minnesota space looked like and how that experience has been for you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kate, for that. And that is a hard intro to follow from Shauna. She is an amazing woman. And I'll echo what she said. I'm kind of sad Darlene Bell won't be joining us today, but I think we will be able to share lots of information and resources with you all. I entered my entry to QPI was about almost 4 years ago in 2018 when I became a licensing worker at Family Alternatives. And I kind of jumped right into the work with QPI, learning about what it is. I attended my first conference, QPI National Conference in Philadelphia, and got to meet tons of people and hear so many stories and learn so much from everyone who was doing QPI already on the East Coast. And I was like, we gotta do this in Minnesota. We gotta figure out how we can continue this work here in Minnesota. And then I was asked to be a co-lead supporting adult on a youth-led action work group for youth and young people who have experienced foster care in the state of Minnesota. And so I've been doing that work now with those youth for almost 4 years. And we've taken breaks due to COVID, like I'm sure many other things have had to take breaks on. But I'm so, like Kate said, it's been amazing this year to be able to speak at the MSSA conference here in Minnesota. It's been great to speak at the QPI National webinar that we hosted. And and just the youth are experts of their own lives, and hearing their voice is super important. And as social workers and people in the field, getting to hear their voice firsthand and then making a change in how we practice is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. And I love that, it's not just about hearing the voice, but then what am I going to do with it? They can't just stop at, I heard something without action. And I know one of the things when we talk about QPI strategies, we're always trying to center ourselves back to that parenting piece, right? So we know that kids are at the center of the work and really believe if we can support parents, then we're ultimately going to have better outcomes and experience and healing for our children and our families. So I'm just wondering if either of you would be willing to jump in and share, an example or two about how focusing on the parents and that role of parenting using QPI practices has made a positive impact in your roles, either as like an individual or your role as a professional.
Shauna, I'll let you. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Shauna.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I think when I first started doing the birth parent foster parent partnership, I didn't consider foster parents, of my kids at least. I was the parent. They were, the foster placement. Until I started working along with QPI more and getting more trained and learning about the relationships that could be built. I think that, understanding that it's best for the child to have both of those people in their lives that are, helping them with school, bedtime, whatever putting them to bed. Sorry about that. Just the regular needs of life. When a child is placed in foster care, a birth parent can't always do that. But if there's a relationship built there, that foster parent can involve the birth parent. They can have the birth parent on Zoom to read a book so that they could go to bed, and they could really share that role. And that's really what, will help alleviate that trauma from being in and out of home placement. It's not going to take away being removed, but it is going to help alleviate it. And it's going to help that child feel much safer. Okay, that my mom's still around, my dad's still there. And having both parents involved and for me, understanding that a foster parent is parenting my child at that time, or, the moms and dads that I work with, having to understand that, hey, this is somebody that's going to be, caring for your child and loving them and making sure that they're okay while you're working on the issues that brought you into the system in the first place, is just a good thing, right? It's the best practices, and being able to make sure that that child can understand that both of those parents have the best for them, is, I think, critical in just in their life and in their growth, and being able to overcome that. I think if I would have had that as a child when I was in foster care, and my foster parents may have supported my mom, maybe I would have had a better relationship with her, because maybe she wouldn't have been so shamed, and that shame that comes with having your child removed from your care is pretty awful.
Mhm.
And I never understood that until that happened to me. And having a foster parent understand that as well and support that parent, that birth parent, I believe is it just helps with, I mean, everything about a case plan. It helps relieve that burden of who has my child, what are they doing, and then creating that relationship between the birth parent and foster parent can also help keep that bond intact when the child is in out of home placement. So I forgot what the question is, because I like to go on on my little I don't know what you call them, my little spills, but yeah. So I think, like, having both parents involved is like the best outcome for that child. And that has to be birth parents and foster parents. It can't be just one or the other.
And I think what I really appreciate what you said, Shauna, and it's a little bit of a nuanced, but using the word parenting as a verb.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we can get really, it's hard to think about it as like a specific role or a noun, but your comment was like, in this moment, they are parenting, but it doesn't, it creates a little bit of maybe space or opportunity for that to be present. Are you okay if I ask just one follow-up on that?
Of course.
So as your role as a birth parent mentor and, working with families in these times, especially in that beginning, right? Like thinking about that beginning of like this, is there any advice or kind of encouragement that you have with your other colleagues, right? Maybe caseworkers or lawyers or individuals of that nature to sort of help support their ability to then support the parent?
So the birth parent or the foster parent?
Either one.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be important. I mean, obviously depending on cases, but I think it's really important to support that relationship between both parents, to encourage a comfort call. A comfort call could make or break a case. Usually, people fall off after the first court case. So I feel like, if they have a space where they know their child's safe, where that foster family is like, hey, I just want you to know I support you. And I know that you're working on having your kids coming home, and I 100% support that. They're here in my home, and I just want to know, what do they like to eat? How do they like their hair done? What do they go to bed with? Is there anything they need to work on in school that you guys have been working on? And building that relationship to, like what I said before, hey, do you want to call around, 7:30 at night or 8 or whatever bedtime is and read them a book? I can put them on Zoom, or I can put you on the phone, and building that relationship up to, once the case closes, they might still keep in contact and support each other throughout life. So if a social worker or a judge or anybody who's coming into somebody's life through child protection could support that relationship in any way that they possibly could, that would be good. Maybe inviting foster parents to cases, if it's okay with the birth parent, being able to talk with them, maybe encouraging, instead of having strangers at a visitation, maybe having a foster parent there instead. I think that, anything that you can do to think outside of the box, or anything that maybe inside the box that's just kind of new and doesn't always feel right, can make a big change. And that relationship could make or break them coming back into the system as well, because they would have that extra support that they may not have had before.
Yeah, thank you. Camilla, I know you got ideas.
Yeah, I got tons of ideas. I didn't know. Sometimes it's okay to sit in the silence. So I didn't know if anyone was going to say anything after that. My head is running with tons of ideas. But the one thing I wanted to like recircle back around to, I think that Kate shared with us at the beginning of the core values of QPI, relationships, right? That's the first one that she shared with us. And I hear Shauna talking about that right now. And it's about being in relationships with the families. And as a licensor, for myself, it's easy to walk with my foster families, my licensed foster families, whether it's a mom or a foster mom and a foster dad, or just one single foster parent, walking alongside them and helping them and giving them those examples that Shauna just said, giving them the examples of, are kids struggling at bedtime? Would it be better if they gave mom a call, or maybe mom could send a recording every single night of her voice? Could you show, like, being really creative and thinking outside of the box, right? We always talk about not every single, I don't like to call them cases, but not every single case is the same. Not every single family, not every single individual is the same. And so we really have to start thinking about what works for this family, what works for this child, what works for this mom, and being willing to be creative about that, right? So we're making that step at Family Alternatives, right? Because we don't have to have policy. It doesn't have to be in policy that we have to build relationships with our birth families, or to inform our families who are looking to be licensed with us that it has to be in policy. We tell them at the front end when they're coming in to be licensed, we value walking alongside our birth families. And so if you want to be licensed here at Family Alternatives, we're hoping that you can also hold that value too. And that's where it starts at. And I think that also helps build some of the negative things that have been in society about, the scariness of working for foster families, working with biological families, and people use different terms, right, to describe birth families. I typically say birth families, families of origin. So it just helps build that scariness right away, that it's not going to be scary for a mom or for a dad who is handling their own things to just say, I know where my children are. I think Chana brought up the comfort calls. I know we're going to talk more about that. I don't know if Kate, you want me to jump right into that, but
yeah.
Yeah. So like, comfort calls are a thing that we do here at Family Alternatives. As a social worker and a licensor who's working directly with our foster families, I could spend the rest of the time telling you tons of examples of comfort calls that we have, that our families do. And it's interesting to me that our families were doing comfort calls before it was in law, before we brought this to legislation. Our families were just doing this naturally. And it's interesting that, and I think many families were, right? Many families at different private agencies, county levels, they were doing comfort calls so naturally, but now it's like, oh, we have a name for it. Oh, this is part of process and part of a child is removed. They need to make a comfort call to mom or to grandma or whomever they were living with before, to talk about what soothes the child at night. Maybe what kind of foods does the child like to eat? What may they be struggling with in school that you can help them with? Those are things that comfort calls are about and for. I have a great example that I would love to share. We have a family licensed with Family Alternatives. Her name is Janelle Black, and she was a newborn baby girl was placed with her. And she came from a treatment center. The baby, she was in the treatment center with her mom. And unfortunately, mom relapsed and an injury happened. And that's what led to the baby girl being placed with Family Alternatives foster parent Janelle. And at first, Janelle didn't have the mom's contact info. And so she was not able to make that comfort call right away. But mom reached out to a Family Alternatives, our number, and got to speak with the staff member here who was able to provide Janelle with mom's phone number, mom's name, let mom also know, like, this is where baby's at. And she Janelle got to call mom and just say, hey, I want to learn some more about your daughter, your baby girl. This is not my child. This is your child. I want to, what helps soothe her? What helps, and she was a newborn. And so mom and Janelle, foster parent, were able to talk on the phone and share each other's phone numbers and names going forward. And one of the things that Janelle had shared with her licensor that I want to read is the first thing she told mom was, we're on the same team. And I just wonder how mom felt in that moment to hear the person taking care of her child saying that, I'm not against you. I don't want to shame you. We are on the same team. And because of you, I get to take care of this beautiful baby girl for a moment in her life and reunify her with you when you're ready. And so that's one thing that I just, like, it's giving me chills right now, even just to say that. And so baby girl has finally got to start some overnights with mom. And Janelle and mom continue to be in continuous communication, continuous conversations. And the plan is for Janelle to continue to support baby girl even when she returns home. And that is what Shauna was talking about there, right? The relationship is even supported after. It takes a village, and that is a real true saying. It takes a village for our children and our families. And I'll wrap up quickly. One other, I just want a direct quote from Janelle was, the first time she met mom, she texted this to her licensor. Oh my word, bio mom is just beautiful. The second she saw me, she gave me a very cheery big hug and thanked me so much. She spoke to me like she already knew me. And that just speaks to that relationship that Janelle and mom were able to talk to each other over the phone. It was amazing. So that's like an example of a comfort call, and I have tons more, so you can always share them. But that just touched me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it is through that real human piece that we get to be inspired. And what we also know about a system is that they like to have some like data or facts that backs things up. And so one of the things that we've been participating in, and Jennifer kind of mentioned it yesterday, was around these quality parenting outreach surveys that the Youth Law Center, that national QPI, is doing. And with that, so we've got a few Minnesota sites doing it. And one of the data points that we found is that if that initial call is done at the beginning of a placement, foster parents are significantly more likely to believe they can partner with the parents for reunification and have that co-parenting relationship happen and feel successful in it than when that first contact point is made later. So as the days trickle by and that contact between parent and foster parent isn't made, there becomes less sort of like confidence that I'm going to be able to do this. And that's not what we want, right? Foster parents are there to support reunification. So let's equip them with that. You know, I think that's kind of a piece to sort of round that out. And there's a couple of things that you guys alluded to a little bit that I'd love to dig in on. So, you know, here in Minnesota, we have lots of farming communities. And so you see grain silos, you know, on the side of the road when you are traveling. And those type of silos are great. But the kind of silos that a lot of us have experienced in child welfare are not so useful to our communities. And so I would just really be interested in, you know, sort of some of the ideas or experiences that both of you have had around how do we create connections and break down the silos when it comes to child welfare.
Yeah. So I am not really sure how much more to say this or in different ways than how it's already been said today, just in the brief time we've been together, and how I want to make sure I pronounce her name right. Sharonda had said it yesterday multiple times if people got to listen to her share her story. But you don't need permission to be in a relationship with people and be in community with people. That's not something you need permission to do. That does not need to be written in policy. And so ways that we have just done it at Family Alternatives is, one, we have to be able to be authentic with how we approach our families, our bio families, our children, and putting on the table there, it's going to be hard. There's going to be very hard conversations. There's going to be hard interactions. We're talking about a system and child welfare that has a history of removing children from their home, removing brown and Black children from their home at a lot higher rates. And so sometimes we're going to have to be authentic in how we approach that, and naming the elephant in the room, if that's what you want to call it, that this is hard and we know it, and humanizing our bio families, humanizing our birth moms, humanizing their stories and their lives. They are the experts of their own lives, and listening to them.
I love that. I love that you said that. I think, you know, one of the ways for me as a person that is I come into my work as a birth mom, and have been involved in the system, and so used to be looking down upon, so used to being judged, and understanding that that's not a very good space to try and work out a case plan. So being able to advocate for other families is something that's very, very important for me. Being invited to the table is big deal for me. I appreciate it. I think lived experience voice matters. And so when I'm at those tables, I always try to invite Kate. So like our QPI and somehow. So, you know, we have meetings every Friday at the Law Center with the judges and the county attorneys and guardian ad litems that are involved in ICWA, and Kate comes to those so that we, you know, she can bring the idea of QPI, not just me, but her as well, and inviting her to different things that we have in our community, different presentations. If it makes sense to have QPI there, having them be at the table so that people know that this is out there, because sometimes if you don't know, you don't know. I would have never have known if I didn't go to that birth parent foster parent partnership. I would have never known about QPI and what was happening in the state. And it's such a good thing to have happen. It's I know I keep saying it's best practices, but it's like really what's best for the family. It's best outcome for the children. And there's a mom, and I just was looking up I was just looking at her Facebook page, and now I just can't remember it. But she said at one of these meetings that every child deserves to keep everybody that they love in their lives. And, you know, I think that's really important. Sorry, for a child to have, and to know that they feel safe in a time where they have, you know, are experiencing this extreme trauma of being removed from possibly everything that they know. You know, school, their home, their friends, you know, other family. So building those relationships and making sure that QPI can be at the table where it makes sense. And then being able to talk to since I get to do direct support with moms and dads, and I work with the attorneys that represent them, bringing up those conversations and saying, hey, have they had a comfort call? Have they been able to, you know, talk with the foster family? Well, what if the foster family was able to be more involved, or would they want to come to a family care conference and, you know, help support the birth parent and things like that.
And as you're talking, Shauna, I think parent mentorship is a hidden gem that is not well enough maybe either understood or has been, you know, curious about, or I don't know if this is a funding thing, but even thinking about that, right? You get to create connection and support both from like, I see you and understand, and let me help kind of translate into this world that is, you know, if you haven't been in child welfare, and even if you are, you know, like a staff in it, it still is like confusing and holds a lot of intensity to it. And so having a partner really is an important piece for us to be able to feel successful.
Thank you. Yes, I believe that it's really hard to prescribe a prescription if you haven't ever talked to the patient. And I feel like that's kind of sometimes the space that people come through when they're making policies or they're deciding what's going on in a case. Being able to actually have gone through the system, it's very it's not always easy, but it's very helpful in helping other parents navigate so that they can be able to, you know, understand life and figure out life on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And the other piece that you brought up, and now like my mind is running a blank, and it was going to be also just a beautiful little gem. It'll come back to me. But Carmel, is there anything that you want to reflect on with, either what you've shared or Shauna shared, or, just thinking about this, how do we create connection between parents in our role as a professional?
Yeah, I think what you said too, Kate, the word partnership, when you had said that, it like rang, my things were going off in my brain. Like, we are in a partnership as social workers, as child welfare workers, as judges, guardian ad litems. We're in a partnership with biological birth families when their children are in out-of-home placement. And so it's really about working with them. How are their kids going to reunify with them? How are their children and their kids going to reunify with them? And it's being in partnership. It's being in community, in relationship with them. Yeah, and I just think about even just after that too, like after kids reunify, thinking of some of the other, you're starting with comfort calls, but then that comfort call allows us to continue those connections and continue those relationships with our families. And thinking about some of our foster families who call us every day and say, you'll never know who I just heard from. Guess who and that is about the start of, we started with being able to like tell our foster parents, it's okay for you to invite mom over for dinner one night after school. It's okay for mom to come to a doctor's appointment. That is building relationship and connection with them to allow them to, when their children do reunify, to know that they can still call you. They can still reach out to you. They can still send you pictures. And yeah, it's just, I really just think it's about being in partnership with our birth families.
Yeah, and both, Shauna and Carmela, you said there's an invitation component to it.
Mm-hmm.
Shauna, you gave the example of inviting me to those ICWA cabinet meetings, which I love. And I'm like being able to like learn and be in perhaps a space that's less familiar. And how do we feel okay with a little bit of that, especially in the role of a worker, to feel okay being a little unfamiliar with what this may look like, but that, having that curiosity and maybe courage this time to show up in there and not be sort of in our typical space. Other ways, when you think about, and you said a few of them, Carmela, dinners and doctor's appointments, but ways to encourage, that connection between parent and a foster family. Are there other examples that you have had that has gone well as far as thinking about, what that may look like?
I just wanted to say, yeah, I mean, so imagine coming into a case plan as birth parent, right? And you don't know who has your children. And you get to go meet them at some place and be supervised, and you notice, you don't like the way your child's hair done, or there's a bruise that you don't know about, or their clothes don't fit, or there's just all these complaints, and you call the social worker and they don't know. You ask the person who's supervising the visit and they don't know. How much could that be alleviated if that foster parent could say, oh my goodness, your kid came home from school today. The teacher said that they fell off the swing, or, little Johnny was, running and fell on the floor and he bruised his shin, or, and just those things that could be alleviated so that birth parent doesn't have to continue throughout their day or week until their next visitation, just letting those things just burn in the back of their head. Like, what's going on? Who has my kid? What's happening to them? How come nobody knows what's going on? And constantly complaining about something that could so easily be explained if there was that relationship right there. And that happens so many times. And I think it's really important that, those answers, are met or are being answered for families so that they can be, they don't have to worry about that, and they can focus on them. And they can focus on whatever they need to be doing. They can focus on their treatment plan, because every, family, every birth family loves their children, and it's shameful. And having them torn away from them it's traumatic. It's very, very traumatic, and it's very, very shameful. And so sometimes people think that nobody care, that we don't care when things happen to our children because, you know, maybe we didn't take care of our mental health or our chemical dependency. And so we just don't care, but we really do. And we really want to know what's happening on those day-to-day basis. And when they show up, what's going on, and having that relationship. Oh, well, this is the size of clothes. I have a bunch at home if you need them, you know, or, you know, oh, well, I'm glad that, you know, that explains that bruise, or, hey, this is the products that I use in their hair. This is how you can keep it managed. And this is, you know, what's happening. And I think just those questions could be easily answered with the relationship between the birth and foster parent.
Yeah. And I think about like, this work can be very challenging, right? We all know that already as the individuals who work in child welfare every single day, whatever your role may be, this work can be challenging, but I don't think this part of the work has to be challenging. Being able to build relationships with our birth families, that this part of the work doesn't have to be challenging. It is normal to be in a relationship with each other. I think about an example that we have at Family Alternatives. We have 2 little boys who reunified with their father. And every year we go to Valley Fair to celebrate our families at the end of the summer. And they get to bring all the kids who live in the home, any kids who are adopted, any kids in placement. And dad wanted to come. And they were already back living with dad, and their sister was still in the foster home. And dad wanted to come to Valley Fair with his boys, but there was a barrier where he couldn't afford it. He couldn't afford the parking and he couldn't afford the ticket. We don't want that to be a barrier for him. So guess what I did? I got on my phone and Venmo'd dad money so he could put it in his bank account and be able to pay for parking and come to Valley Fair with his boys so that they could see their previous foster family, their previous younger people they lived with, and that they can see that it's okay for dad and our foster parents to like each other and to be in relationships and to go on this ride with us and love it with us. It's okay for that. There shouldn't be a barrier and it shouldn't be a challenge.
Can I give an example as well? So when my kids were in foster care, I stayed in a space. It was a Native American kind of shelter, sobriety home, but they allowed smoking in the space. I did not have supervised visits. I could have my kids, but I didn't have any place to take them. I didn't have a home. I was using a bus. And one of the spaces that the foster parent agreed to meet me was at the Qpi powwow. And so that was out of the box. She got to come and see a piece of my culture, and I got to take my son to spaces that I took him in before. And I think those are things that you could do that could help, you know, create cultural spaces and answer a lot of questions and give them a little bit of more understanding and some meaningfulness behind what's important to me and why it's important for my son to have those in his life. So that was an out of box thing that the foster parent did for me. And I think that was way before QPI. So I really did appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Shauna, I'm kind of looking at some of the questions on the chat, and I think someone had a question specific to specific resources and how we can keep children who are in out-of-home placement connected to those communities. And I love that example that you just provided. And for some of our foster families at FA, we've had families invite mom over for dinner, and mom cooks the meal. It's not the foster parent cooking. Mom is cooking the traditional Mexican meal. Darlene Bell would have been a great example to share this one, but she had children in her home who were of African culture, and she didn't know how to make their traditional food. So she went out into her community of people, of other adults, and said, I have these 3 children I'm caring for. I think it was actually four children I'm caring for. This is the kind of food they eat. I have no clue how to make it. Can you give me some recipes? Where should I go? And that is how it is about being in relationship in your communities as well, and researching and networking. That is how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both lovely examples. Yeah, I was noticing some of the questions in the chat too. And I don't know, Shauna, if you want to tackle in this moment any specific resources for ICWA cases to help keep kids involved with their community and culture if family isn't available. So my guess is it's looking at a non-relative foster family and how to stay connected to culture and community.
Well, one, I think, so in every case, there's always a in ICWA, there's usually a tribal liaison that's at the table. And I think, and especially here in Minnesota, we have a wonderful Indigenous community, and we have a lot of community programs and community spaces. So I think, you know, they hold different ceremonies. They have powwows. Usually school systems will have an Indian advocate, and they'll have powwows there. Not every school, but you know, those are spaces that you could request, say, hey, listen, is there something in the community I can go to with mom or dad and bring the child with? And then asking the, you know, the tribal rep, and then asking if you have that relationship with the birth parent, asking them, what is there that that's culturally specific that you would, you know, enjoy doing that we can do together, or that, you know, you want to keep, like if there's a ceremony that, you know, a naming ceremony for your child that was supposed to come up and now we have CPS, being able to continue those traditions and keeping cultural specific things in place is really important. So they can reach out to the tribal liaison. The best resource is the birth family, mom, dad, aunties, uncles, you know, brothers and sisters. That's the best resource there. But there's a ton of things in the communities, in your school systems, and you know, just go on their websites and look, and you'll get a flyer. You can call the Equal Law Center and ask for one of the advocates or the paramentors or someone there, and see if there's something going on in the community. You can call probably any of the community agencies and say, hey, I'm a foster parent, and I just, you know, I have some Native children here, and I just wanted to know what I can do to keep them involved in their spaces within their cultural identity, because keeping their cultural identity in place is very, very important, especially when it comes to the removal of Native American children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, circling back to the best person to ask is our parents and family and the youth themselves, you know, depending on age. Like I do believe that a role of the foster parent is to advocate for what's best for the child in their home. And if they're saying, I really miss so-and-so and I want to be able to connect to them, like, yeah, let's try to make that happen, because that goes to like who I am. And that is important for all of us, and particularly for youth who have to experience out-of-home placement. There's a couple of questions. So, and there's a little bit of a theme that's coming up in the questions, looking at maybe wonderful, you know, or great material and powerful stories, wondering how you might respond to the common system pushback, you know, safety concerns, drug and alcohol issues. So that was a question that was in there. Also, one of a similar kind of like, what does it look like if a parent's actively using drugs or alcohol, and how do we stay positive? So I'm going to kind of lump those three together. We'll see if we can do that in a digestible way. But, you know, thinking about, you know, when there are these, you know, Carmela, you alluded to it, like when there is going to be hard things that happen, and whether that is because, you know, parents may still be utilizing protective responses that no longer work for them, like alcohol. Foster families might be using perspective or responses that aren't helpful in like staying a little guarded, or I've had this experience back then, I don't want to have it again. You know, so thinking about, yeah, just what are some ways that, you know, you've been able to sort of push past or step around, you know, that stigma or fear or these, you know, kind of conditions of uncertainty that create the silos versus breaking them down.
Well, so a lot of times when I share my story with people who are working in the system, I talk about how I came into the system. I my son just recently passed away, but I had a 16-year-old son who was on special needs. He was in a wheelchair, quadriplegic, and nonverbal. And I was addicted, and I OD'd in a public park with him. And that's how I came into the system. And I spent 33 days in jail. And if I didn't have certain people who supported me in my community, because like I said, I didn't have birth family, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I think that people need to understand that everybody deserves support and everybody deserves another chance. And I think that coming from a space of judgment, if that's where you're coming from, maybe you should reconsider where being in this work, because it's hard and it's ugly, and there's a lot of letdowns and there's a lot of pain. But with the correct support, families can overcome addiction. They can overcome, or they can manage mental health. I think that I had that stigma on me for a very, very long time. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get into this work, because so many people judge me. My social worker said she would not even give me my kids back. I got them back 2 weeks later. She wouldn't write me a letter for housing. I had people in my community do that for me, my tribal liaison, and I got my kids back 2 weeks later. And if I didn't have that support, I wouldn't be where I am today. So when you look at somebody and you judge them for, having an addiction or having mental health, just, understand that there's underlying issue. I didn't have family. I come from a lot of trauma. And I was lost as a single mom with, kids and a special needs kiddo. And, being able to meet them where they're at, and then to also just support them, just plain support. You don't need to, go over above and beyond, but not, if you call and you say, I'm not coming from a place of judgment, mean it, if you say that, because that person might feel only comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, this is happening. And I feel bad, you know what I mean? And being able to just actually support them, say, well, that's what I do anyways in my job. I'm like, well, let's figure this out. Let's go get a Rule 25. Let's go do this. Let's call your social worker and let's just move forward. You can't look back. It's already happened. Let's just move forward. And I think that, support is when you say it, it sounds great, but it's really hard to do when you come from a space where you're holding these beautiful little babies and you see mom show up and they're, not in the best space. Just be patient and just continue to support them. I mean, that would be my advice, because judgment can make things go in a whole nother direction. But that's not a fun space to be in. So if you have families who are, showing, for instance, I was in a meeting with somebody and they were like, you know what, I took my foster kid to meet dad, and dad didn't show up 3 times in a row. He did not show up, and I had to listen to see those kids cry and listen to and answer questions that I didn't know why he didn't show up. And it's like, well, maybe dad's on a bus and coming from parenting, you know what I mean? And in a lot of places where you show up for visitation, if you don't show up within the first 10 minutes, your visit's canceled. So if there's anything that happens on your way from a bus trip to wherever, if your session goes a little longer in counseling, but you needed to stay there because it was deep, or if you missed your bus, or if there was a fight on the bus and you couldn't get there in time, you miss your thing. And you might not always have, in that instance, that foster dad did not have the ability to call dad, and that dad didn't have the ability to call foster dad. So they just didn't know. And it just built up this animosity between them. Well, being able to have that relationship being built would be good, so that, they could support them. But there are underlying reasons, and being patient and understanding, it's not always that somebody wants to mess up. It's just sometimes they're unseen circumstances. And also, addiction is a hard thing to overcome, and that requires a lot of patience, but it also requires a lot of support.
Mm-hmm. And I hear you say support, not fix.
Right.
And there is a difference in that. And sometimes I think just by nature, right, as helpers, as individuals who care about others, how much is it pulling us to try to fix something or someone versus how much can we give space? And, you're using a lot of patience, Shauna, which is true, but that space to allow support to unfold. And it might not look the way that we want, right? Mm-hmm. And there are true safety concerns that happen, outside of, the unforeseen circumstances, but it's like, how do I be with you in that in a way that still honors your humanity rather than making it try to be fixed. Like, yeah, we'll be ready and waiting next time.
Yep.
You know, if, you know, someone came, you know, under the influence to a visit or something, like, yeah, okay, I want to see you next time. I look forward to seeing you next time. You know, just the way even our language, I think, can be powerful, as you're alluding to. So, and
just think about how that message is sent to parents, birth dad, birth mom. We want to see you next time. Let's try next time. And instead of like shaming them, I spoke to a class last week, 40 students, and I had shared with them very similar to what Shauna had just said. If you're coming into this work, and they're students, if you're coming into this work with judgment right away, you're not going to be good at it. If you've been in this work for a long time and you're judging, you have to sit back and reflect on how you want to move forward in practice, because these are humans. We are all humans. These are people's lives, and many of them have a lot of things stacked against them. And so it is not about a fix. It's not about fixing an individual who might be struggling with chemical dependency. It's about how to support them. And that is, I think, where we get lost at, myself included as a social worker, and as a former child who had parents who were addicted. I had a long addiction. But it's not about the fix. It's about how can we support these families and these moms and dads. Like Shauna said, she didn't have a birth family. She was doing it by herself, and she needed some support. And what does that support look like?
And for each other, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of my favorite things about QPI and this like adventure we're on together, is that like we're on it together. And when you are in relationship with individuals who are out, who hold a different role or have different experience than you, it automatically widens your perspective. I have learned so much in this time with individuals, just being able to step back and listen and think about, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way, right? Like if I'm looking straight ahead at the camera, I can see maybe a little something over here in my periphery, but if I turn my head and really like change my perspective, it allows me to see it differently. And I think that's one of the joys or the beauties that I've had in working with QPI, and, you know, particularly my, you know, fellow champions here like Carmela and Shauna, is just that, like being willing to be in relationship to better, you know, practice or do the work. And I know one of the questions that I want a quick answer is like, are we thinking QPI is a requirement? Will we push for it in Minnesota? And I just want to echo what Jennifer Rodriguez said, like, you know, not everyone has to sign on that dotted line of commitment. I would love to have that, but it's more so the essence of the practices, right? Are we thinking about relationships and we're holding those in the center? Are we, you know, thinking about what is developmentally a child needs when we're doing transitions? You know, a baby who spent 9 months in a foster family doesn't just, you know, have court, get reunified and go home the next day. Developmentally, you have now separated them from a person who was providing care 24/7. Like that is going to take a hit on their development. Like, are we making decisions based on that? And whose voice is at the table besides your own, right? Like, even thinking about like another tangible thing, you know, are foster families being invited into family group conference? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think they're supposed to, but are we always doing it, right? Are we making sure that phone call comes at a time that we can get a hold of them, and why that they would be valued there, or attending court, or, you know, various things of that nature. So just thinking about a little stuff of that. I know we've got a little bit more time, and we can look into some of the other questions if, you know, Shauna and Carmela, you're willing to hang in for a few more minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
Of course.
All right. One question is, what is a simple everyday, every week practice that we can do to make our engagement with foster families and children in placement more genuine? What is an underrated practice in this area that you can think of as being helpful?
I think for myself, I mean, me and Shauna both do the work every single day. I'm working directly. I think the question was specific to foster families. Mm-hmm. I mean, I work directly with licensing foster homes every single day. So what a simple, I mean, I just think like it is so important to just humanize like relationships. And so like when I talk to my foster parent, I'm not just calling them on the phone to say things about the case or what's going on, but it's more so like also like, how are you doing today? Actually, how are you doing? So like, I think just being like authentic in your relationship with the foster parent is a nice practice that I do too, is also just checking in on them, besides like checking in on like their foster parenting in general, but like, how's your son if you have a son, or how was your mom? How was your trip? Just like, I think that also helps our foster parents. For me, I think for my experiences and family alternatives and how we practice with our foster families who are licensed with us, it's just so different and humanized, and they're also people too, and this is their life. They are letting, like Shauna had said, we're having strangers watch visits. Foster parents are letting strangers, initially, children are strangers to them when they enter their home, strangers entering their home. So just checking and asking, how are they doing? What do you need from us?
Mhm. Yeah. Shauna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, after being a part of QPI and building good relationships with a lot of foster families and seeing what they're going through on their end has really opened up my eyes. And I don't know if QPI is doing it, but I know we talked about, being able to have a support system for foster families to be able to talk with one another, I think is important. I think everything should be, I mean, they're going to need support as well, just as much as birth parents are going to need support. So being able, nothing works if only one side is supported and the other side is not. So being able to support both families is good. Like Mila said, checking in on them. Sorry, my computer is dying. But checking in on them, making sure that they're okay, and having conversations. I think that's one of the things that I'll probably have conversations with my moms and dads that I work with, just asking, do you ever ask the foster family how they're doing, or if they need anything from you? Like if they need you to, record that voicemail or record that message for the child for bedtime, or if there's a book that they have at home that you used to read to them all the time, being able to make sure that they're checking in as well, I think is something that I really am going to start doing with my families. I know that they have a lot on their case plan, but if they do truly have that relationship, having the support on both ends is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's not forget about like a little fun and joy and play, I don't know if you do this, Carmela, but when I, supported foster families in a more direct way like that, like, are we playing board games, a card game? Hey, I got this new trick, whatever it might be, just to like allow a little of the pleasant in, there's a lot of compliance, and because there needs to be in systems, but how do we also have, maybe some creativity that can be coupled into that? It's not just about the discomfort and the unpleasant and but like, where is there little moments of joy to be mutually shared?
Yeah.
And so, looking at that as important things. And so there are a couple other questions, and I know Stacy said that we would be able to answer them and provide that, which I know that we would all be willing to do. And I would just love to say thank you for taking your time. Thank you for sticking around. And being, hopefully you've walked away with some ideas around how do I look at relationships, how do I think about what is it that the child and the family and I need for support, because it really is about all of us. Carmela, any last thoughts?
Yeah, one of my last thoughts is, it's actually funny. I'm trying to not to what's that, multitask, but my coworker is like texting me and she's saying, there's always a safe way to be in connection with our families. I know there was a couple things where people were saying, what if it's not safe? There's always a safe way. We are living in a world of virtual communication now. There's so many ways to be safe with our families, if that's something they're struggling with in the moment. And so that's kind of my ending. And you also have to think outside the box. Be creative in your practice. Be creative in your work. Yeah.
I love that. And it's true, right? There are always ways to figure, it might not look maybe the way, but that's where the box comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just stepping right outside of it. So Shauna, any final words or thoughts?
I just want to say, and Minnesota has 11 different tribes. And when you have Native children in your home, their culture is their identity. So being able to think outside of the box, being able to do things that are culturally specific with their families, like you mentioned, having fun playing board games, maybe attending a powwow at a school, maybe going to things like learning how to make a ribbon skirt if you have a little Native girl in your home, or just things that you can think of outside of the box that you can do with the family that could be culturally specific is really important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kate and Shanna and Carmela for the wonderful panel today. The audience can reach out directly to Qpi Minnesota with the website and the email on the screen here. So please feel free to reach out. We didn't get to several questions. And like I said, we're going to create a document, like a parking lot question document that we will ask the panelists to follow up with some of these questions and then send out to the audience for access. But then again, if you want to reach out directly, you are welcome to do so and then explore their website. Thank you again, Kate, Carmela, and Shanna. So now we're going to take a 10-minute break and we will see everybody back here at 2:28. I'd like to welcome everybody back from break for the second half of our conference. As you can see here on the agenda, we still have several presentations and we're really excited for the next one. I'd like to introduce MJ. MJ's presentation is entitled Respecting and Protecting Communities of Color Involved in the Family Regulation System. MJ is the founder of MJ Consulting, a grassroots organization dedicated to dismantling culturally incompetent practices and mitigating such practices' impact on the community by challenging sources of oppression and inequity in the child welfare system. In this session, MJ will explore the colonizing mentality of the family regulation system, including workers' role in identifying their trauma footprints from a culture of individualism. The audience will learn about new ways of respecting collective culture and healing from the trauma of the family regulation system. These are critical conversations, and we're really excited to have MJ join us. MJ will present for about 20 minutes and leave about 10 minutes for the audience's Q&A. Welcome, MJ.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is my first time at this conference, and I'm absolutely excited to be here. Just like my intro said, Stacy, we will have a conversation, a very quick conversation of just kind of bringing it all together at the very end. This is more of an introduction. I just want to give a little bit more background. I teach at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. So I do teach social workers. A lot of the classes that I teach are around racism, equity, social justice, power, privilege, and oppression. Also child welfare, student and classes around the child welfare and the abolishment of the child welfare system as well. So essentially, whenever I'm having these conversations, a lot of these conversations are new, especially to people that are still working within the system. I do currently still work within the system. I worked with, in the state of Colorado here in Denver, which is where I'm located, with the Guardian Ad Litem's office, and I currently still hold a caseload. So I am a social worker and also considered a clinical consultant and consult on cases with attorneys that represents children. So I've been doing that for about 10 years now. I then ventured out on supporting parents to help get their kids back whenever they had a dependency and neglect case. And the way that parents were treated made me say, okay, I need to go out on my own because the system is a lot more flawed than I thought it was, because I was just very much in the lane of protecting the children and supporting the children. And that was my lens, essentially. Then I recently, in the state of Colorado, we developed a program. We're going on our year 2 of the parent advocate program. So I currently supervise and mentor parents that have had a dependency and neglect case, DNN cases here in the state of Colorado, and then have successfully gotten their kids back. So what they do is they work as peer advocates for other parents to help them be successful in obtaining their kids from the foster care system. So in doing that, again, seeing a lot of the injustices on the side of how parents are treated, as well as viewing how the foster care system, specifically here in the state of Colorado, is used as a private adoption agency. So I have a few statistics I want to show you about what that looks like. What I currently do now is I'm not working one-on-one with parents anymore, but now I am one of the only experts in the state of Colorado that expert on social science of racism within the child welfare system. So what that looks like is if there is a case where a child may be adopted out by a culture that is not of their own and the parents and or kinship, usually I testify on behalf of kinship. If kinship is a healthy place for that child to be with, and I testify on behalf of kinship for that child to be placed with kinship and not be adopted out from the foster care system. So they bring me in as a cultural expert, as an expert on attachment, cultural attachment, international psychology, and so forth. My education is master's in social work. In my background, I was obtaining my PhD in international psychology. With obtaining my PhD in international psychology, I was in my very last year of my dissertation. And I realized, and I did some work internationally. I worked with the Syrian refugee population transitioning to the German education system. I also worked in the Philippines and in Kuwait as well. So essentially what my job was to do is to understand what is the relationship with that collective culture and psychology. And usually we identify psychology as more of a white man's science, not necessarily because it's only applicable to white people, but it's been utilized to support white theories, and sometimes negate and go against communities of color and collective culture. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So as I was on my way to obtain my PhD, I realized specifically within the child welfare system, how psychology has been weaponized against communities of color, against people of color. Examples of that is the misdiagnosis or the overdiagnosis of schizophrenia in Black men and women. I believe Black men were 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with having schizophrenia, even though it was false and they did not have it. Same with having Black women and having the misdiagnosis of schizophrenia. I've also seen the field of psychology being utilized and weaponized against communities of color with the theory of attachment theory. An example of that can say, this young child has been placed in a possible adoptive placement home, and if we move them back to their birth family, then they will not be able to attach again, or they will have reactive attachment, which there's no research to actually prove that and show that, as well as culture was not necessarily implemented in any of those attachment studies. So with that being said, I said, I can't continue my PhD within psychology. I wanted something more of that social justice aspect, which is how I got into my current PhD program, which is leadership development and social justice change, with Fielding Graduate School in Santa Barbara, but it's a hybrid program. So we do research internationally and some research also in California and Canada, and as well as some online hybrid models. So I say that to say, because my entire lens of how I have worked to work within the child welfare field, which I've been working within the field since 2010, really changed how I currently operate with that social justice lens. I do come, I don't know if you can tell, but I come from the idea of abolishing the system. Most people don't have an understanding of what the term abolishment means, as it is in relation to the child welfare system, which we refer to as the family regulation system or the family policing system. Essentially, the way that our organization and my community defines abolishment of the child welfare system is to say the people that are more negatively impacted by the system should be the ones to actually incorporate the system, develop the system of what's best for their families, what's best for their communities. So it's more of this respectful piece. And that comes with the idea of an individualistic versus a collective culture. So individualistic cultures are cultures that are more westernized, more industrialized cultures, European, Australian, North American cultures. So mainly usually of white skin is what I say within America. Collective cultures are Asian cultures, African cultures, Latino cultures, and so forth. So the idea of an individualistic culture is the ideology, and this is psychology terms, the ideology is the individualistic culture means that you put oneself above the best interest of the community. And the collective culture is the complete opposite, which means that you have to make sacrifices of yourself for the betterment of the family and the betterment of the community. So a lot of the times we talk about how sacrifice is a collective culture's love language. And in order to identify if you are respecting that culture, how are you identifying with that culture? Do you relate to a collective culture? And do you make sacrifices for that culture? Coming from an individualistic standpoint, they're not taught. We're not taught, especially within America, because America is very different in the fact that we have multiple collective cultures within the individualistic society. Individualistic society is also what keeps capitalism going as well. Speaking of capitalism, we do know that the foster care system is a $33 billion a year company. And we do refer to it as a company because there is money involved. There is money that is exchanged. There is a myth about abolishment that if we abolish the child welfare system, then so many children are going to die. We do have studies, and more recent studies, a lot of studies that were done were very much hypothesized and had smaller groups of people that were actually tested. Also, there's a different kind of population that's doing research. So you have younger people, more people of color that are actually involved in the research as well. So we actually know that children in foster care, and this is from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Policy Lab, and this came out in April of 2020. So this is all readily available. But children in foster care are actually 42% more likely to die in care than children in the general population. So essentially what they did was a study from 2003 till 2016, and they saw that the deaths within foster care remained the same. And they were very steady. Now, the general population between the years of 2003 and 2016, there was a decrease in deaths, and there has been a decrease in child fatalities in general population by 2.5% each year. So there's a lot of myths that if we don't have this system in place, then children are going to die. They're doing also a lot of new research and studies from the COVID-19 population, as we know that there was a lot less children within the child welfare system because they were not as involved with mandated reporters. So mandated reporters make up the most of the reasons why children are actually captured within the child welfare system. And we know that children of color, specifically Black children, are 5 times more likely to be captured than their counterparts within the family regulation system because of their proximity to mandated reporters. Now, there's also another conversation that we are having. What does it mean to be a mandated supporter versus a mandated reporter? So we're moving away from reporting and we're moving more towards supporting, which again goes more towards that individualistic mentality to more of this collective. So the mandated supporting, and I always love to use this example of, I remember there was a schools in Chicago, and there was a very high rate of children being absent from school. So as we know that when kids are absent from school, they can also trigger to call into the hotline of saying, hey, these kids aren't in school, maybe you need to go do a child welfare check. Well, come to find out, one of the reasons why specifically this school, that children were not going to school was because they didn't have clean uniforms. They didn't have access to a washer and dryer and have the finances to do that. And knowing, especially coming from communities of color, sending your child to school in dirty clothes means that you'll get a child welfare check, and that would be considered neglect. So how they solve that problem, instead of, again, the mandated reporting piece, is supporting and Tide laundry detergent essentially brought in multiple washers and dryers to the school. They brought them in on a trailer, and then the families were able to do their laundry for free, right? So essentially you're thinking about what is the issue and what is the problem and how can we solve it as a community, because we know that it's more negatively impact when children are actually involved in the child welfare system. So looking at the idea, and essentially what I would like for you to do if you are within the system is evaluate, how do you identify? Do you identify with individualistic cultures? Are you more of that Western culture? Are you more of the ideology of the individual, the independent, and so forth? Or do you come from collective cultures, which internally collective cultures is, again, that sacrifice of self for the betterment of the community, which is why most people don't understand or have the conversations. We do whenever we think about indigenous populations, and children that were sent to boarding schools, Native Americans. Also, I am Indigenous, Native American here, Muskogee Creek Nation and Cherokee, and I'm also a survivor of the child welfare system as well. So I do come from that different perspective of speaking with lived experience, which is also greatly important in doing this work. But essentially, there's lots of conversations and research to show that when a child is removed from a community, removed from a family, then that continues that generational trauma, which a lot of generational trauma did have a foundation from the boarding schools. Another reason why in Canada, they were able to sue, I believe for 33, it was a very large amount of money, $1 billion for the children that were put in boarding schools because of that generational trauma that has been inflicted on that community. The same thing happens when there is a termination of rights within Black and Brown families. As a collective culture, it does not just affect the immediate family, but it ripples effects throughout the entire community. So having an understanding a colonizing mentality within doing this work. And again, we're just raising this conversation. I will let people know how we continue these conversations and how I have the nationwide organization that I do, where we are survivors of the child welfare system, professionals and community members that just want to do anti-racism work. We continue these conversations. So this, we're just touching the surface of it. So don't feel as though that you're missing anything, because I am trying to just paint a large picture of what we're moving in and the direction of the for us, by us model, which is the people that are more impacted by the system should be the one to create the system that's best for us. The colonizing mentality, which a lot of it is an individualistic mentality, makes you believe that you have all the answers. And yet research shows that there's more negative impacts to the children and to the families that are involved. We know that as of 2019, the average amount of children that is within the foster care system, around 430,000 per year. 32 of that population do end up going with kin, but 46%, almost half of those children end up being adopted out. They end up being with non-family, non-relatives. So that is a very small amount that ends up actually returning home. There's other statistics that we are able to know, and this is why I want us to go back to that colonizing mentality, that we know that it's not working, and yet we keep doing the same thing. People within the abolishment field, a lot of us are lived experience and survivors of the system. And rarely do we have the conversations within my community of reimagining it, or how can we restructure it? The bones have always been negative. The foundation has been rooted in white supremacy. Most people have the idea that foster care began with the orphan trains, or group homes began with the orphan trains, but that's actually false. The first group homes actually were developed right after slavery ended, whenever previous or prior white, specifically white women slave owners or white women property owners opened up what they considered group homes, and they were not referred to as group homes as then, but they essentially said, hey, all of you freed Black people are not able to financially take care of your kid, let us house them. And that was where a lot of the sexual abuse and the mental abuse and still the physical abuse and physical labor occurred. So it did not start with the orphan trains. It actually started at the end of slavery, whenever a lot of families did not have anywhere to go. And that's just a lot of history that I did not know until I start working and looking within outside of the system. And I realized, again, myself as an Indigenous Black woman, have a very colonizing mentality. And what that looks like is that you believe that you know what's best about a culture that you may not even relate to, due to what education that you have received about that population, not necessarily what that population reported is what's best for them. So when evaluating what your relationship is, and I know I have about 4 minutes because I really do want to give you time for feedback, because some of this is new information for people. Some of this, it may not be new, but either way it goes, I just want to give you some time to just digest all of this. But I want you to think about, what trauma do you bring into with the work that you do, and understanding just by being a social worker, you have a trauma footprint. The way that we evaluate carbon, specifically in Colorado, we like to be very, very environmentally cautious and understand what do we put out in the universe. As a person within this field, and I say specifically social workers because I am a social worker. Not all caseworkers are social workers, and vice versa. But just by your presence and being in someone's family and someone's life, you are a system, and you are system involvement, and we bring trauma just by being a part of the system. We should not normalize families being involved in the system, and we normalize it, and then we create more systems from the systems after we've destroyed families and populations and discombobulated and destroyed communities. Then we create another system to do that. So I want you to evaluate what system, what trauma footprint do you bring with yourself? You will evaluate that by saying, do I relate to this community that I'm working within, or am I policing it? The field of social work is a policing field without a gun. And I say that as a very proud social worker, but also as very self-aware with the damage that I have done and the damage that I continue to do by working within the system that I know is rooted within bias and systemic racism. So understanding what your trauma footprint is, understanding your colonizing mentality, to know that we have more negative outcomes and negative impacts and more children die in care, and yet we are still spending more than $33 billion a year on this. Another understanding that we should know as well is that the government spends on average 10 times more on foster care and adoption than they do with actually reunifying families. And this is all statistics that we have and that we know, and yet we continue to work within the system and we continue to uphold it. When I went to the American Psychological Association, the APA conference in Chicago in 2018, I remember I met this amazing doctor that studies Black boy trauma and trauma within Black men and Black boys. And he asked me after his presentation, it was phenomenal. And I went up to him and we started to chat. And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work in the child welfare system and I help assist and children be safe and hopefully reunify with their families." And he said, "Okay, so essentially you uphold white supremacy." And I said, "Well, I can't uphold white supremacy because I'm a person of color." And he said, "Unless you are dismantling it, unless you are actively pulling down the system, then you are actively holding it up. And if you're not actively holding it up, then it sits on your shoulders. So you're still doing injustices. You're still doing damage, even by just being present." So if you have been in this field one day, 30 years, 50 years, the question that I always have my students ask when they enter the field as new social workers is, what have the people done and your mentors done to dismantle white supremacy structures within this field? And if you cannot answer that question, if you cannot talk about policies that you've worked with or things that you've dismantled to make it equal or biases and so forth, then you're not deserving, nor are you qualified to work with collective cultures, because they are more negatively impacted than individualistic cultures. So I am very grateful to have this conversation with you. I'm very grateful to open this up also to comments and questions. It is a lot of information, but I'm also a resource. So I will let Stacy filter some questions in.
Thank you, MJ. There are several questions and many comments. So let's see. Let me just let's start with this first one. Can we get a link to the foster care versus general population research you talked about? And if you don't have it available, we can send it out to folks as well.
Absolutely, I can absolutely do that. It is, I mean, honestly, if you sent, it's from the Hospital of Philadelphia Policy Lab, April 2022. So if you just Google that, if you Google children in foster care, 42% more likely to die, the article pops right up.
Okay, thanks. And if we can find it, we'll put it in the chat. Otherwise, we can send it out to the audience as well. So we have a lot of comments. I'm just trying to get through. People want to know how you've become an awesome radical human.
Oh,
and let's see. So Rachel here said, what are some realistic ways we can break down racial barriers and stop holding up the white systemic racism?
Yes. So here's the thing. This is something that colonizers, and mind you, and I say colonizer because I'm so completely done with white savior. White savior has been like taught up to kind of be cute and nice. And I also am not a white savior, but I do have a colonizing mentality, right? And this is the way colonizers think, is they think that I am the one with the solution. I have the degree, therefore I have the solution. But what I want people to think about and question is, are you qualified? And who said you were qualified? Because a degree does not qualify you as a social worker. And mind you, if you're not doing social justice, if you're not doing policy reform and creating equality, you are not a social worker. Because before people were able to even go to school, before it was legal for people of color to even go to school, we've been social working. It's been our entire basis of fighting for equality is social work. So I always want people to look around and say, ooh, am I qualified? Am I qualified to work with this population? Am I able to respect this population the way that they should be respected? And if you're not, then I ask you to remove yourself and to put someone else in place that can. Because when you have more people that's respecting collective cultures, then the system falls automatically, because that white supremacy won't be there. And I know it sounds like it's not possible to happen, but again, when capitalism is involved, we have to hit it with capitalism. There was something that a parent advocate told me, and mind you, also research shows that parents that are involved in the system, where all of parents that are currently involved in the system fighting to get their kids back with the DNA case, over 40% were in the system as a child. So we know that we're creating generational trauma. And one of my parent advocates that I mentor, who is phenomenal, and I also sent, I interviewed him. I have a YouTube channel called Abolish, of course, and that is on my website as well. But his story is phenomenal because he was removed when he was like in elementary school. He's been in multiple foster homes, multiple group homes, aged out of the system from juvenile, was falsely accused. There was abuse happening in his foster home. The foster parents blamed him. He was falsely accused, grew up in juvenile, then came out, went to prison, became a parent. His children then got into the system, and then he fought and won his TPR. But what he told me hit me so hard, and I hope you feel this when I say this, because I never felt this. And he said, "You all are human traffickers. You get paid. You get money to move children around, and children have no say. I begged to go back home to my mom. I begged to be back with my family. And I got moved to different places and money was exchanged. How are you not a human trafficker?" And for me to have done this work for as long as I've done this, thinking that I was doing the right thing, but also seeing the other end, seeing my juveniles becoming older and then having children and then treating them terribly after we, as a government system, raised them, who our rights should have been terminated as a government system, raised them. I said, oh my gosh, we are human traffickers. We move children around and there's money involved and they don't want it. They don't want it. We know of all of child welfare cases, we know that less than 18%, less than 20%, around 18% are actual abuse cases. And what is that, 82%? 82 are actual neglect, but those neglect cases is actually poverty. Can you imagine what we can do with $33 billion attacking that poverty piece? So evaluate yourself and see, do you belong here? Because people that are caseworkers, they have the hardest job, in my opinion. I've never been a caseworker, but my colleagues that are caseworkers, my colleagues that I've worked with for many years that I have the utmost respect for, have been put in very uncomfortable situations to where they didn't believe in the system anymore, but they also knew that that was their job, right? So evaluate if you still want to be on that side when you have an entire generation of people that are survivors of the system saying you did it wrong and you knew you did it wrong and you continue to do it wrong.
Okay, MJ, we've got time for a few more questions. So this one says, I have had women I work with say they wish they own culture offered the Okay, I have had women I work with say they wish they own culture offered the programs we white people offer. I am just not sure how to help another culture raise up the same programs. Suggestions?
Yeah, I don't believe that there should, here's the thing. If we had equality, we wouldn't need programs. When I was a student in social work, I never wanted to work within policies. I thought it was dirty, it was messy, it was complicated. You won't need programs, you wouldn't need systems if you were abolishing the policies that upheld white supremacy. We as professionals in the system, we are so, as I say, a factory social workers. We are inundated with systems, that's what we spit out. That's what we talk about, that's what we spit out. What if we left people alone? And what if we treated people equally? Like, can we reimagine just what equality can actually be and look like in the States, where people would not need a system? They wouldn't even need involvement. We should be working ourselves out of a job. And yet, every year there's more money into this system. We need to not think within systems. We need to think within cultures. We don't need to think within programs at all. We need to let people be. If you did not do your job and someone else from that community that was related to that culture, related to that family, actually had a stake, actually made sacrifices, right? Because that's what we're taught to do from collective cultures. Do you think that you would even be needed? The idea of colonizing is saying, I need to be here because I told myself I needed to be here, because my organization, which is a colonizing organization, said that I needed to be here. So therefore, I'm here to do what's best for you.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time getting through the questions because there's lots of comments that folks seem to be really moved and inspired by your presentation. And so I think a lot of folks are kind of taking in the information. The last two questions are sort of similar, so I'll try to combine them, and you can take, a few minutes over if you need to, MJ. These people are asking kind of what can the average social worker do, him or herself or their self, to be more impactful in affecting the broken system. And then furthermore, in terms of if we abolish the system, how then do folks come alongside families to ensure that families are whole and children are safe? So those are some big questions.
Absolutely. I want to tackle the first one, and then I may have you repeat the second one for me. The idea that the system is broken is a myth. The system is never broken. None of them have ever been broken. They are working exactly. If the system was broken, then the system would not make money. The system makes money, so therefore it is not broken. What people have to do is, and this is what I say to my students, unless you are an ally or a co-conspirator of that population of people, you should not be working with them because you are policing them. We in America have the lowest morality within white American culture of what an ally is. An ally does not mean that you do not use derogatory language to describe a group of people. An ally means that you've done an action to fight for them. And I don't mean by getting paid. I don't mean by doing your job. I don't mean by policing a group of people. What I mean by allyship and a co-conspirator is that you look to the community and you say, what can I do? You don't look within your system because you all are like-minded within systems. The reason why I do what I do is I keep a pulse within the system. So I still work within the system as an expert. I still supervise parents. So I still am close to that pain and that empathy that they are experiencing, and having people experiencing termination of rights, experiencing generational trauma, experiencing racism, biases, classism, and so forth. I still keep my pulse on that, but I work on the outside of the system. You won't be able to change your mentality if you are only within the system. One way of how you can work with on the outside of the system is to join the coalition. So the MJCF Coalition is my nonprofit that we just launched in April. So our website is up and running. We're still adding things to it, but essentially what we do is we work with everyone on the outside of the system, and we say, what do you need and how do we do? We offer services like grief trauma therapy for parents that have had their rights terminated. We call it phantom grief therapy. Can you imagine that we've been terminating rights, and I don't know of any within the state of Colorado organization that have ever done services of grief therapy for parents that have had their rights terminated. So we know when their rights terminated, it's untreated trauma. And again, they continue to be in the system, right? We also do therapy of how to help families heal collectively after the department has reunited your family. There's so much trauma that we don't even think about. So much trauma of removing a child, removing families, dispersing them, having them be in strangers' homes. And then parents have came to me and said, our children don't even trust us. They don't even trust that when someone knocks on the door, no one's going to take them. I have not heard of any program saying, how do we reunify? How do we reunify the love, the support, and the safety and trust within the family after the department has left? We also do therapy of group support therapy for parents that have had that have had domestic violence on their treatment plan, because, and I say in the state of Colorado, but I also know it's nationally, parents that have been survivors of domestic violence are re-victimized through the system, and also ventilized that they were not keeping their children safe. So we do support groups for that. So my recommendation is to work outside the system, be within community, and then you'll learn how to support the community. But you're not going to figure it out doing, this staff meeting with everyone else that are professionals within the system, because we are all colonizers and we're all policing communities of color. That is what we do as a job.
Okay, MJ, there are several more questions, but we do have to wrap up. So I'm going to put those questions in the parking lot Google Doc, and I'll send that to you to send out to folks. And the link to the study, if you could just send it to me and I can get it out to the chat when we're done.
Sure, I can do that. Thank you so much for this. Again, join the coalition. We meet once a month nationally. Everyone logs on from all over. They're professionals of the system. Everyone wants to do something bigger and something better. Everyone that's on the ground, right, that I know. Not necessarily the management, not necessarily the decision makers, but there's going to be more of us that are from lived experiences and are co-conspirators and allies of the population that's more negatively impacted. Then there will be people that are making the decisions, and then we will make a large impact. So I am so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much for being so gracious to me and giving me this time. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, MJ, and thank you for the audience members who participated in the Q&A. Appreciate it. Okay, so next we are going to introduce Renee and Patrick. This presentation will focus on supporting family connections when relative or kin are the foster care placement. So a lot of you have been asking for this information. A lot of folks have been giving feedback that it's very different when the foster care placement is relative or kin. And so this is a presentation that's going to solely focus on that. Renee Banis is the program supervisor for the KinLink 30 Days to Family program at Ampersand Families here in Minnesota. She's a second generation adoptee of an Anishinaabe mother, and she has been passionate in working on Ampersand's initiative to move forward in keeping kids connected to family, community, and culture. Patrick Passane is a coach and trainer at the Institute for Child Welfare Innovation in St. Louis, Missouri. He has over 14 years of experience in the child welfare field, from foster care case management, child abuse and neglect investigation, and relative and foster home training and licensing. In 2015, Patrick began working as a 30 Days to Family specialist, conducting diligent and exhaustive search and engagement efforts for family members of children who were just entering the child welfare system. So these two presenters are going to offer insight into the unique family dynamics at play and how to facilitate these relationships in meaningful and healthy ways, which will be supportive for parents, children, and their family systems. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for Q&A. We will provide the presenters' contact information, and they encourage you to reach out. So welcome, Renee and Patrick.
All right. Go ahead and share my screen here. All right, thank you so much for that introduction. It's awesome to be here. And so again, my name is Patrick Passane, and I am sort of tasked with kind of setting up the tone, laying the foundation for sort of what we're going to be talking about with regard to family connections, and doing what we can as professionals to make sure that the children that we're serving are connected to family members when they come into the system, but also those kids that have been in care maybe for months, maybe years, even decades or more, that maybe have been cut off from their extended family support networks. And there's a lot of push within the field right now to sort of reverse that trend and make sure that we're valuing and prioritizing family connections for both kids that have just entered the system and kind of going back and reevaluating the work that's been done with kids that have maybe been lingering in the system for a long time. And so, it's important as we get started here to sort of, again, lay the foundation philosophically for what it is we're trying to accomplish when we think about family connections. We now live and work in a field that, child welfare in general, at a time where we know it's not an opinion anymore, that children do better in almost every outcome we can measure when they are not only placed with family members after coming into care, but linked in maintaining meaningful connections with those family. Reunification occurs more quickly. They're more likely to be placed with siblings, less likely to experience placement disruption and having to move from place to place to place if we're able to get them with family. And so knowing that we're sort of living in that environment where it's not a question and not a debate as to what the best outcomes for children are, we are sort of, it's our responsibility to kind of mold the system that we work in into being more family friendly, for lack of a better way to put it, and prioritizing maintaining those family connections as much as we can for the children that we're working with. And so in terms of the way that we want to advocate for rethinking how we as a system approach family involvement, many of you that are on here have probably experienced or at least heard about relatives that are wanting to become involved with children that are in care in some capacity, whether it's providing care or having, placement of the kids that they're related to, or just wanting to be involved as an emotional support or something more tangible like respite or babysitting or financial support to the parents, being involved in these cases in some capacity. But I'd be willing to bet that many of you have also seen and experienced family members being ruled out, passed over, or maybe even not contacted in the first place, because as we all know, case management in particular is such a demanding and such a incredibly difficult job that we don't even have enough hours in the day to contact maybe beyond a handful of relatives that maybe the parents made us aware of, let alone be able to sit down and actually search for a wide population of extended family members to reach out to. But we have to try to make those steps to sort of reprioritize our work, especially when these children first enter the system. And so instead of, asking ourselves or telling ourselves that we can't involve family because of reason A, B, C, or D, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or we explore a couple of family members that were brought to our attention, but there are some things on their background checks that we instantly sort of take at face value, and without even asking the family members about it, we'll kind of just pass them by or rule them out, or just decide that for the sake of safety, we have to leave that child in a traditional foster setting because we know that that family is licensed and trained, and we feel way more comfortable with ourselves that they're in a safe spot and we've done our jobs. But it takes more work to get that child with family members because we have to navigate some of those more trickier issues. But we also know that if we can get them there and we can get those connections made, that they're much better off in the long run. And the outcomes that we see both during the time they're in care and after the fact are much more positive. And so asking ourselves as a system, are we content with what we have right now? If our own children, if our own loved ones suddenly had to be a part of the child welfare system, would we be okay and feel comfortable with the fact that they were at least well taken care of? And I know from a lot of my colleagues and my own personal thoughts that many of us would say no, that the system is intrinsically flawed and that we wouldn't feel comfortable with our own loved ones being a part of it. And yet we often expect that sort of compliance and that partnering with families or with parents without really giving enough attention to the fact that they're just worried about their children entering into our care, so to speak. And so asking ourselves, what would we want done for our own family? Would we want a worker to, if my child came into care, would I be content with them contacting my brother and my parents and calling that diligent search for relatives? Or would I want them to sit down and contact all of my aunts and uncles, maybe great aunts and uncles, cousins, not to mention all of my non-blood kin who are very important parts of my life that would be devastating if my child lost contact with or weren't even given the opportunity to be involved? I would like to think that I wouldn't stand for that. And yet sometimes we expect a lot of our parents to sort of live with that. Hey, we reached out to who you told us to, and none of them could be involved, or they have background check issues, so we're just going to move on. And so we can do better, and we can work harder to get them connected with family. And so, again, with those next two bullets, when we are engaging with family members, do we hold them to higher standards than maybe we would hold a traditional foster parent, or someone, we're expecting for them to be entering into engaging with us with a clear background check. And we look at maybe an aunt who's wanting to care for her niece and nephew, and she has a DWI from last year. And are we using that as an excuse to just stop our engagement and stop our assessment of her right then and there? Whereas when we might be assessing a traditional foster home to become licensed, and we find a DWI on the record of the foster mom who's trying to become licensed as a foster parent, would we just dismiss them right there, or would we try to work through it and listen to their side of the story and really determine how it's not going to be a safety issue, and then proceed with their licensing? And so, does that double standard exist? And kind of going along with that, do we as a system, put kids at a detriment and keep them disconnected from loved ones, from extended family members, because of red flags or risk issues that we are qualifying rather as safety? Are we saying that child can't be living with his aunt because she had a DWI a year ago? Is that a true safety concern? Is that a legitimate reason to keep those two individuals separated? Or is that just a risk factor, or a red flag, as we like to say, red flags versus red light, that just needs some deep, meaningful engagement and some courageous conversations, some safety planning, and some partnering so that we can overcome that and get this child with family where they belong? And so just a little bit of exploration in terms of what we like to call like the power dynamics that we know exist within the system. And again, I think that these are a lot of things that we're sort of aware of, at least cursorily or on a superficial level, but maybe because we're all busy professionals, don't take enough time to really think about how this is affecting the families and parents that we're working with. So when we're engaging with members of the family and the parents, they are naturally in a state of fear and naturally in a state of distrust. I mean, we just took away their children. And regardless of the reasons why that happened, they have no incentive to go into this situation feeling like we have their best interests at heart. And so we are having to fight an uphill battle to even make rapport and establish rapport with parents, especially when we're beginning to work with them, because they're experiencing fear. Maybe they've been involved with the system before and been even burned by it before, and that's contributing to their levels of distrust too. Anger, how many times do we, hold it against a mom who storms out of a court hearing, or, has a meltdown during a team meeting, and use that as an example of why, she is unstable, and more evidence of why she's unsafe for her children, and not really taking into account how we might react in a similar situation. And the guilt and the shame and all of those other complex emotions that are surrounding that, just right off the bat, let alone these families that have been involved with us for years. And then, we as professionals, without intending to, will enter the situation with an intimidating presence, with our clipboard and our tie and our, expertise and confusing language like assessment and so is appropriate, and we're conducting investigations and making sure that you're not the perpetrator, and permanency. And do we take enough time to actually sit down and explain those things, or maybe even alter the way that we're speaking to individuals in order to let them know that we're actually wanting to approach them with empathy and acceptance, and that, if we're going to actually make any headway here, we're going to have to work as a team. And so we have to get rid of these power dynamics and stop treating families, stop treating parents like clients, and actually start thinking of them and treating them like team members the same way we would our colleagues. Certainly they're not getting paid the same way we are as professionals, but their cooperation, their teamwork is every bit as important on these cases and for success as our participation is. And so why don't we foster that? Why don't we, really try to build that rapport and, again, approach the parents, especially with empathy and understanding instead of judgment and, not giving them the benefit of the doubt. And so what we want to do is shift. The partner dynamics are what we want to take over for these power dynamics. And so, we want our parents especially to feel valued as individuals that have strengths, and not just the parents, but then by extension, their entire extended family. So let's stop with the apple doesn't fall far from the tree mentality. Or, I know for a fact that all of mom's siblings have been in the system before too, with their own children. And, her father is actually incarcerated. So there's no way any of these people are going to be able to be involved. And so we know that that's just rubbish, that every single person in the family has something that they can contribute regardless of their situation. Maybe they're not going to be approved to be able to provide direct care because of significant background issues, but even someone that's incarcerated. I've had many conversations with family members that are serving life sentences in jail or in prison that are able to tell me so much information about their family, who I should reach out to, who in the family system is going to be important in making any sort of plan we have for the future work. And I remember myself as a young, child welfare professional, and being presented with those types of individuals. And I know that I used to think, like, why would I waste my precious, valuable time that I don't have enough of already reaching out to grandpa who's in prison, because there's no way he's going to be able to be involved anyway. But getting rid of that mentality and really valuing that every single individual within these families has strengths. Whether they choose to bring those to the table is their decision, but we have to give them that opportunity. And so again, kind of reiterating that only the members of the family are the experts on their own family. We can't look at a child abuse neglect history or a court report or a background check and feel like we have all of the information that we need to fully assess these relatives. The good, the bad, and the ugly, they are the ones that know what's really going on and what really is the heart of the matter of what needs to be addressed within the family system. And so we have to tap into that and respect where they're coming from in that regard. We have to keep in mind that family members don't have the knowledge, tools, and ability to reach out to us. It's one of my favorites. I've heard that many, many times about family involvement. This kid's been in care 5 years. So if anyone in the family really wanted to be involved with this child, they would have come forward right now. So why would we start this, any kind of intense family finding process now? Like, they had their opportunity. This child's been here forever. And again, I'm sure many of you have encountered situations where even aunts, uncles, grandparents are suddenly brought into the fold, and we're like, hey, had I been notified, had anyone told me about this, I would have done more earlier, and not take for granted the fact that they just know what's going on. It is our job as the professionals to find them and actively bring them into the system. And we have to abandon the savior mentality, a mentality that I know I had very young coming into the system, and I know a lot of new workers still experience, that I'm going to come into this system and I'm going to help these kids. They're in terrible situations, and I'm going to pluck them out of their homes where they're unsafe and get them into a licensed, approved, loving home far away from, the poverty area where they were living in. And now they're going to a much better school, and not thinking for a minute about the trauma and the pain that we are inflicting on that child without even realizing it, because we're removing them from their people, from their environment, and all of the things that have been supportive for them in the past. And so, through these kind of retooling of our perspective, retooling of the way that we're thinking about family involvement, we can slowly start to shift that power dynamic down and start to really treat these family members and the parents as partners. And so that brings us to 30 Days to Family, as you heard mentioned in our introductions. And as was stated about my own experience, I was a 30 Days to Family specialist here in St. Louis, Missouri for a number of years. And we're now replicating the model with Renee and her group in Minnesota, and are super excited about it. The program was designed in St. Louis, Missouri in 2011, so it's about 11 years old now. And what it is a very intense, fast-paced 30-day search for relatives and kin from the moment they enter into the system. So we start with children that's, day one, we're there at the initial court hearing, and we immediately start engaging with family at that very moment. And not to say that all of our cases are open for a full 30 days, but we work to identify a minimum of 80 relatives. Often it's much more than that, 200-300 in some cases. We identify not only one family placement option, but at least 2 backups. So just in case something were to go wrong in that first placement, that child doesn't end up back in traditional foster care. There's other family systems. And we outline, as it says there, a robust network of supports that really sustains the stability of that placement and doesn't take for granted that, okay, even though these are family members, they still need all of our support and all of our resources and all of our help to make this work, even more so than our traditional foster parents do, because foster parents know what they're getting into a little bit more, where we're asking our relative providers to kind of jump into this all of a sudden. And so again, 30 Days to Family is in its strict sense designed for kids that have just entered the system, but the philosophies and the practices that sort of underline it can be applied to children anywhere at any point within the system. So with that, I will turn it over to Renee.
Thanks, Patrick. So just briefly about our agency and just kind of what we do. So Ampersand Families is one of the 5 agencies in Minnesota contracted with the Public and Private Adoption Initiative with the state. So our work began about 13 years ago and was really focused on just permanency and support for older youth and families. So in recent years, we've kind of recognized the need to dig a little deeper and help more with relative kin families specifically. So back in fall of 2021, so not very long ago, we started piloting the 30 Days to Family program. And the 30 Days to Family program really fits in with our kind of our menu of services for our KinLink program, all which is geared towards the intensive early on family search and engagement that we really do very well in replicating the 30 Days to Family program. So just some of the values that kind of center us in our work in KinLink and working with relative kin at our agency is that belonging to a family is a basic human right, and that children should be raised by people, not programs. All people have to be treated with dignity, whatever their family story and whatever their personal challenges. And then having hope for the future sustains us when life feels hard and we lack control. We believe very strongly that children have a right to remain connected to their people, and that we know preserving the connections from the get-go is a whole lot easier than trying to restore the connections further on down the road. So professionals are the bridge when it comes to making the extra efforts towards family preservations. Workers have the ability to set the tone of empowerment, value the strengths of all family members, and then help family members collaborate towards success. Being outside of the family without a high emotional investment, we can be that kind of calm, objective party to center a lot of those difficult conversations between family members. Lean on culturally relevant community partners and collaborate. So we don't do our best work siloed. In our KinLink program, for example, we communicate really frequently across teams at Ampersand Families, across teams with our county partners. We also do quite a bit of networking out in the community, especially with culturally responsive communities who can kind of do that ongoing support that youth and families need. Always seek out consultation and fresh perspectives. So we know that this is high stress work, fraught with vicarious trauma. So when we work together, we kind of relieve that pressure to be making all of these huge decisions we have to make every day. And then especially as we engage with relative families and we kind of uncover the generational trauma, some complicated family dynamics, that consultation and support becomes really, really necessary as we navigate some of these difficult conversations and just help families work towards better, more healthy communication. And then just remember our shared passion as child welfare workers, you know, give each other grace as we just navigate these systems for families. And honoring parents, very, very important. So we have to be careful about the types of language we use when we refer to parents. For instance, the term birth parent, for example, is hurtful to a grandma who's caring for her daughter's children. To her, mom is always going to be mom. So we just always strive to use really family-centered, inclusive language, even when talking amongst other professionals on the case. Don't forget dads. So dads really have a hard time with custody laws here in Minnesota. They're not always favorable to dads, but dads care very, very deeply about their children. So it's really important to loop them in as soon as possible, help them establish paternity if that's something that's needed, keep them and their family members informed of what's going on in the case. So we recently had a 30 days to family case where the mom didn't know the whereabouts of dad. She thought he was in jail last time she knew where he was. So our 30 days to family specialist, with her sleuthing efforts, was able to track down dad, who is now living in Mexico. Since she's Spanish speaking, she was able to connect with him via WhatsApp. And he was so, so grateful that somebody took the time to contact him. And he had no idea his daughter was in care. And now that he's looped into the case and what's going on, he's able to establish some regular phone visitation. So really cool thing when you can get dads involved. And then help parents navigate the gravity of the process with empathy and acceptance. Yeah, that's a difficult one because, like Patrick said, the language that we use is very convoluted to somebody who's just finding them in this horrible situation. So we want to use a strength-based approach. We know that the parents and families are very overwhelmed when they come to us. They're tired, frustrated. They happen to be going through one of the worst experiences of their life. And parents are likely not presenting their best selves to us or their other family members. So just kind of centering those conversations, helping them understand the language, and then even better, maybe helping them find a parent-to-parent mentor out in the community who can really talk to them and connect with them at a real level. And then the last thing here is be advocates for system change. So we know there's a lot of frustrating things in our work that we're up against: permanency timelines, a lack of childcare funding for families. All these things are good reasons to write to your representative or join a working group working on policy change, do a blog post, whatever you can do, however small, just be advocates. So the child's placed with family. Now what? We want to build strong, sustainable layers of support. And in those support plans, always address the who, what, when, and where. So we're partnering with families, we're laying the groundwork with them so they can take care of each other. In our program with KinLink and 30 Days to Family, We like to build the natural supports. We like to go deep and really do some specifics, especially with the details. So if a mom says, hey, my sister usually brings my kids to church, we'll find that auntie, get her contact info, find out when she brings the kids to church, when she'd bring them back to the foster home, make sure that we connect foster parent and that auntie so that each other, so that they're familiar with each other and they know each other's phone numbers. Just be really intentional about bridging those connections amongst family members, particularly the supports. And then we assist in initial conversations between the parents and families. With many families, there's some tough conversations that are going to be there. There's feelings of grief, loss, some conflict can often rise to the surface. So workers can help to center those conversations, help family members kind of put aside those differences, all on focusing on just really providing a healthy, loving environment for those kids. And then also we can help guide families towards specific resources in the community, like family therapy and support groups. And then we just know that those natural family supports that we take the time to build right away, while the kids are in care, are going to be the natural supports that are there for families after reunification, and really ultimately what parents are going to need for their long-term success in parenting. So here is a list, by no means exhaustive, of some of the resources for families in Minnesota. A few of these are national groups, but we just really stress to families the importance of getting support, but also being very intentional about finding what support groups are going to work for families, because it's just a little extra legwork we as workers can do, so that families can kind of do that hard work of healing, and we, just build the support for them early on so that they can have access to those things. Okay, and we kind of walked right through all this information in a quick 30 minutes. So our contact info is available. So if anyone has any questions about 30 Days to Family or our relative kin family work, please shoot us an email. Patrick and I are always helpful. I think when there's questions, we will answer them. So thank you so much for having us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Renee and Patrick. It's always nice to hear about kind of innovative organizational programs, and we're hopeful that lots of the audience members will reach out to learn more. Okay, so for our final closing session of the day, we have Honorable Ann K. McKeag. Justice McKeag joined the Minnesota Supreme Court in September 2016, making her the first female Native American to sit on any state Supreme Court in the United States. A descendant of the White Earth Nation, Justice McKeag is a native of Federal Dam, Minnesota, where she grew up on the Leech Lake Reservation. Her perspective from the bench will address the importance of birth and foster parent relationships. Welcome, Justice McKeag, and many thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I've noted the number of participants, so if any of you drop off now, I'm going to know it, and then I'm going to have them tell me the person who dropped off, and then I shall contact you individually. So if you have others who dropped off before I got on here, make sure you give them heat about having dropped off early. First, I just want to say thank you to all of you. There's over 400 of you who participate in this. And in the world of child welfare, I think it is the most important work that anyone can do in the state of Minnesota. I think it is also the hardest work. And I think that you are one of the groups that is least often thanked. So thank you for all that you do for kids and families that you work with. I am sure you are all exhausted by Zoom. Some of the things that I think are interesting about Zoom is that we learn things about ourselves. For me, it is that I appear to have no upper lip. Now, I've been told in my lifetime that I actually had full lips. But now that I have been on all these Zoom calls for the last couple of years, it has been determined that I, in fact, do not. So I guess Zoom has been good for some things. And I say that just to sort of lighten the mood because you've all been listening to extremely heavy information. And it is also very heavy work that you all do every day. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of the bench as a team member for all of you who do the work, because sometimes I feel like we seem to be removed from the process, and perhaps it might appear that we don't care, or that we are not as involved, or that we're just up there making decisions and perhaps being too critical of all of those who are coming before the court. But I assure you that is not the case. Like yourselves, it is extremely traumatic work for judges who do this work on a daily basis, because many of us take it home with us. And that impacts the way that we parent our own families. It impacts the way that we interact with our community. And yet I think those of us who dive into this work and do it the way that it is needed to be done must do that in order to actually do the work well. And I can't say enough about all of the work that Minnesota is doing. You know, we all listen to different perspectives. I was listening today from the time that it began, and I think it is great that the University of Minnesota through this program is actually able to pull together lots of different perspectives. I know that there are times when I have listened to other presentations in my career where I have perhaps cringed, or I have felt defensive, or I have started to wonder where this person was coming from. And yet at the same time, I do think it is important that we can all listen to those different perspectives and draw from those various aspects what might be helpful to us in the work that we do on an everyday basis. So from the bench's perspective, it is really important that we continue to strive to do better by our kids and our families. You know, it is interesting, when I left my work as a county attorney and moved to the district court bench and now on the Supreme Court, I sort of stepped out of my role as a county attorney representing social workers and was looking at it from perhaps some, not just from the bench perspective, but tying into some individuals that I had once removed when I was a county attorney. And seeing things from sort of that view as well led me to look at some of the flaws in the system, but also the incredible need for us to continue to care about the work that we do and to get it right. Because I do think that this is an area where if we do get the work right, we can have a really positive impact on reducing those who are involved in the criminal justice system all the way across. And I give an example of a young man that I had removed when he was 2 years old. He had been a victim of sexual abuse, of physical abuse, horrific, 17 different placements during his lifetime. He ended up graduating into delinquency and ultimately, unfortunately, into the adult criminal world, where he spent the majority of his life. And looking back, I can see all of the different points of decision-making along the way. And I also think that if there was a lot more support for him, not only as a child moving and growing into the system and growing up in the system, but also to his family, where we weren't all just combating each other. Because a lot of times when I started out, it really was, you know, usually you had sort of two different sides of the aisle. And some kids were definitely lost in litigation. So the idea of being able to partner families with really experienced foster families who have really great experience in parenting children, and sometimes children who have challenges, I think is a long way towards healing a system that is incredibly difficult for everyone. And I was listening to some of the things today about, you know, if you can imagine yourself as the parent, which I have tried to do, of having my child perhaps taken away or removed, and then thinking about how would I feel about them going to a stranger care if it wasn't some family or friend, and not having any further information, as is often the case for quite a period of time. And it would be extremely frightening. So when you think about the I think you guys call them care calls or something along those lines, where you can check in with the parent from the foster family and make those connections. I think that goes a long ways towards at least healing some of those relationships. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, but it certainly is something that I know that the bench supports, because what we really want is for these kids who are the focus of these proceedings to do the very best that they can. And that really means sort of getting all of the adults to get onto the same page. And that can be challenging from so many ways. And also when you look at it from a perspective of we all have to work within a system, and the system is imperfect because the system is run by all of us, and including our legislators. And yet I still think that we have to do so much more about bringing the outside world in to learning the work that you do and to appreciating the work that you do and knowing the challenges and accepting the challenges. And for those that we don't want to accept, to really doing so much better. I also wanted to just say that don't be afraid of the bench, invite the bench to be your partner, educate the bench. Not everyone who shows up in juvenile court or doing these cases shows up with wisdom. I always said that when I was appointed to the bench, I came with what I knew, but I also came with what I didn't know. We don't have any sort of great special training that happens for judges when they become judges. You take with us where we come from, our different perspectives, and our imperfections. And sometimes that can come out sideways, I think, particularly in juvenile court. So don't be afraid of making the bench your partner in system change and in the ways that you are implementing these cases and building these relationships, because after all, it really is one giant team. And that's what you want, is to have a group of people who are working together. I always thought that I would never want to be the single person who had this child's life or future hanging solely on my shoulders. It is so much better when it is a collective group together. And I will say that one of the best models that I experienced was when I was working as a county attorney, and there was a partnership built between the county attorney's office, the public defender's office at the time, and the Indian Child Welfare Law Center, and the bench, and the guardian ad litem office, as well as other professionals within the community. And it was difficult work. It was challenging work. We got around and we sat around tables and we hashed out sort of a loose structure as to how we were going to do these cases. But having to come back to the table every day and working with each other, I think led to some really promising changes that were positive. And it was also built an infrastructure that was really strong. But it could not have been done if we did not have the bench as a part of that plan, as well as a part of the decision making. Because one thing I have learned, that when you become a judge or a justice, is if you plan a meeting, a lot of people will come because a judge is the one who planned the meeting. And so there is power in that position. And we should be a partner that you can actually tap to, that you can call upon to invite to help make some of these changes. Not all of the changes will always work. And obviously you have to do them within the boundaries of the system of which we work, but it doesn't mean that we can't bust out and do some other positive things, because after all, we're Minnesotans. And I know that there has been sometimes a lot of criticism of the child welfare work done in Minnesota, but as somebody who's done it since 1992, I also think that we have an awful lot to be proud of. I think Minnesotans are never just willing to sit back and accept the status quo. We are always trying to do better. And that is why when you can have an exchange of all of these different ideas from different jurisdictions, some of which may ring true, some of which may sound perhaps not so true, or not something that we would want to take on as a state, it's important that we can have that exchange of ideas. So, the bench recognizes the work that you do. We aren't always very good about saying thank you or acknowledging the difficulties of the work that you do, because you're all in the moment and trying to get a task done. But I do want you to know that the state of Minnesota has about 300 judges. We've got, I think, 26 appellate judges, and we all recognize that this is incredibly important work and incredibly challenging work. And we know that when it is done correctly, we do see a reduction in the youth that actually start out as young children and unfortunately graduate to the delinquency and sometimes into the adult criminal world, which is nowhere we would want any of our youth to be. And it really is all about the kids. and the kids need their families, but obviously they need their families to be well, and they need allies, and that's the foster parents. And so when you can have a system built around allies and relationships and working hard at making those relationships better, it is only going to trickle down and have the positive impact on our kids. So I just want to acknowledge you, and I want you to reach out to your district court judges and invite them to, whether it's a ride along for it's a job that you do and you want them to see what it's like from your perspective. It will only enhance, I think, their ability to make better decisions on the bench. And if there are issues that you think the bench could be doing better, I certainly am wanting to hear that myself. I work on the Children's Justice Initiative, which is we're a statewide committee that works on the child welfare issues. And we work hand in hand also with the University of Minnesota. So we do want to hear the criticisms as well as if we're doing something right, because we don't often always talk about what we're doing right. And so I wanted to just sort of leave something with you, and that is that it is a saying that was once told to me many, many years ago in my work. And some people call it a prayer, some people call it a thought, some people call it, I don't know, whatever words you want to choose to use it, but I think it is very reflective of what's going on today. And I hope that you will find something in what I'm going to read to you to be helpful. It is a Lakota saying, and I think it speaks very much to the fact that we are all related, we are all interwoven together, and therefore we all are invested or should be invested in each other and not just in ourselves. So miigwech to all of you, and to this I say, to the Creator for the ultimate gift of life, I thank you. To the mineral nation that has built and maintained my bones and all foundations of life experience, I thank you. To the plant nation that sustains my organs and body and gives me healing and herbs for sickness, I thank you. To the animal nation that feeds me from your own flesh and offers your loyal companionship in this walk of life, I thank you. To the human nation that shares my path as a soul upon the sacred wheel of earthly life, I thank you. To the spirit nation that guides me invisibly through the ups and downs of life and for carrying the torch of light through the ages, I thank you. To the four winds of change and growth, I thank you. You are all my relations, my relatives, without whom I would not live. We are in the circle of life together, coexisting, codependent, co-creating our destiny, one not more important than the other, one nation evolving from the other, and yet each dependent upon the one above and the one below. All of us a part of the great mystery. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Justice McKeague. It's so helpful to have the perspective of the bench as such a critical part of the work that we do collaboratively, from community partners to our child welfare professionals and our tribal professionals. So thank you again. I want to thank all the participants. I know you're going to want to hear logistics in terms of CEUs and things like that, and Stacy will jump on in just a minute to give you that. In the meantime, again, I really want to thank everybody who attended today and or those who attended both yesterday and today. I think we heard a variety of perspectives as Justice talked about. I do believe it is the role of the university, and we are called upon to bring together people with all kinds of different perspectives to be able to learn from each other, to be able to hear and listen and challenge our own thoughts and biases and perspectives of quote unquote truth. So I hope that you continue to seek opportunities like this in university settings as well as in community settings to really challenge yourself, challenge your thinking, challenge your practice, and to be able to have open, honest conversations that aren't always easy, but are always important. So with that, I will turn it over to Stacy and thank again our CASCW outreach team for all of their work on this conference, and each and every one of you for showing up and participating.
Thank you, Tracy. Before we get to the final logistics, we are going to put MJ's study in the chat for those of you asking, and we'll put it on our website as well. There's a lot of people who are wondering about that. So final wrap up, CEUs will be emailed to all attendees within a week of this conference. The conference recording will be posted on the website for everybody to see, and we encourage you to circulate the information as much as you can. The presenter PowerPoint slides will be available as well on our website. And then we will have an evaluation as soon as the Zoom closes. We really encourage your feedback. We got great feedback yesterday, great participation. So please take a couple minutes, a couple moments to fill out the evaluation. And if you would like to share more feedback, email us, please, at cashew@umn.edu. And just a final thank you to everybody for attending, for your time. We know that 2 days, 6 hours on Zoom is a long time, but we really do hope that you learned a lot and that you will check out all of the additional resources on our website and hopefully you've learned some new things. So thank you to everybody. We're going to end a few minutes early. Please reach out with questions and have a great afternoon. Thank you.